Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman, and this is Dissident Dispatch. Yeah, I can talk. I'm going to try a different screen setup. I think it's going to be better for us to be more visible. I am so excited for tonight's show. I have a guest with me who is somebody I've been following for quite some time on Instagram, JewsInSchool. She's done amazing work covering the Arab-Israeli conflict in Gaza right now, and also just pretty much all over the world, and monitoring what's happening on our campuses and our schools with our Jewish students and with all of our students, really, but as it pertains to how our Jewish students are being treated, and thus the name JewsInSchool. So as you can see, she is anonymous today with good reason, because in order to do this work, one needs to be anonymous. So thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Deb. I've been following you for a long time too, and I love what you do. And anyone who is as passionate about education as you are, I cannot help but be a fan of. So thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate that. I asked you to come here because a while back, I honestly can't remember how many weeks, it wasn't that long ago, you did a series of Instagram posts specifically entitled, matching what we've titled here, why, well, you called it, why doesn't Holocaust education work? And I'm saying, why Holocaust education doesn't work. Because I've read through what you said. I'm like, it doesn't. And what you were talking about is that it doesn't work to defeat anti-Semitism or to prevent anti-Semitism in young people. And I wanted to talk to you more about this, or rather have you come on and explain it to my audience, because this is something I've seen a lot of people say ought to be the antidote. And in fact, here in North Carolina, where I live, there's been a push to make sure it's being taught, because it's supposed to be. And we're getting reports that the Holocaust education is meager at best or doesn't exist at all. And that's a violation of law. Like, they're supposed to be doing it. But I'm over here looking at that going, yeah, I get it. And I understand that if they said they were going to do it, they should do it, and they should do it well. But that's not the answer. I just have never been able to articulate it the way you did. You did a brilliant job. And so I would ask you to please this evening explain to us your point of view on this. Why doesn't it work? And real briefly, for those of you who are new to my channel, please like, share, and subscribe and get more people watching us live. Please feel free to comment. Obviously, super chats get, preference in terms of who we're going to answer questions for. But we'll try to get to your comments and questions. Now, if you're watching on Instagram, they give us only an hour. So we're going to try to cover this in an hour. I think it would be a little challenging for me as producer and host to start a brand new live once they kick us off this one. So then hop on over to YouTube or X if you prefer, and we'll be continuing there if we're not done in an hour. So just letting you know. All right. And obviously follow at JewsInSchool on Instagram too. So start us off. What prompted you to do this series of posts? And then what's going wrong? Why is it not the antidote?
Actually, what's interesting is when I started JewsInSchool, which was under a different name at the time, 6 years ago, I had two primary focuses. And one of them was misinformation about Israel in curriculum and education in general. And the second was essentially exploring what was happening with Holocaust education, because I was quite displeased with what I was finding. Now, I want to clarify, this doesn't mean that I don't think it's important to know everything about the Holocaust. I think it is an essential and vital part of our education in Jewish history, period, of course. So when I say things like why Holocaust education doesn't work, there are some very specific reasons to that. So I was really excited that you liked this post, Deb, because I I felt that you got it. And um, when we decided to meet and do this podcast, when you invited me on and you said, "Yeah, I want to talk about this," I said, "Oh, that you have no idea how near and dear that is to my heart." Um, so I kind of boiled it down to four different reasons. And then we can like delve a little deeper because essentially on the post, as Deb knows, I just, have a little square and I can tell you in a little square,
Sure,
but
sure.
it's not the same thing. Um, so so I'm going to say, in the overall sense, the reason why Holocaust education doesn't work is because for the last couple of decades, education hasn't worked.
Yeah.
So, it,
Thus my channel.
yeah.
It's like
So
it wouldn't exist if it didn't.
exactly. So it's not a big shock. Uh, Um, um, it's certainly in keeping with how things have been going in the education and academic sphere.
Sure.
So there are four, and I use my own colorful vocabulary to explain it. But dejudification is the first reason. And I think the biggest problem here is that they're attempting to teach something that is central to Jewish history
Mhm.
without knowing the history of the Jews, Jewish indigeneity, Jewish identity, the history and civilization of the Jews. Um, it they essentially exclude Jewish voices from the narrative, and it makes this portrayal of this event very narrow and victim centric, and essentially, I think, really exploitative. So,
Right.
this kind of taking Jews out of the story, in essence, really exploits Jews in order to make it about something else.
Right.
Um, a, a good example of that, I think, would be the universalization of the Holocaust. So, um, it's kind of an all lives mattering of it. So a lot of times in Holocaust curriculum, uh, you'll find lesson plans that say, "Oh, since we're talking about the Holocaust, why don't you go ask your grandparents about an important moment in history? Maybe they remember the invention of the um, the color TV, or maybe they uh, yeah, yes, don't. I can't. It's very disturbing, but there uh, in an attempt to try to make it a universal connection with history, they create parallels that are really not appropriate for
Mhm.
something as profound and tragic as the Holocaust.
I've seen a
Um,
lot of, when you said the all lives mattering part of it,
yeah,
and you describe it as a universalizing, I've seen it lumped in with the civil rights movement or
yes,
and ironically, I've been saying for a long time, I certainly wish they would talk more about Jewish contributions to the civil rights movement,
yeah,
right? So when the reverse is not true. So
no,
while you're doing Holocaust education, I'm seeing a lot of discussion of how it was just like slavery. Oh, except slavery was worse, right?
right,
Went on longer, yada yada yada. And there's that kind of equivocation, like it wasn't a unique and fundamentally different experience for the world, never mind just for the Jewish people. But also the flip side isn't true. When we get into, Black History Month and so forth, you don't hear about the important Jewish people who,
No.
I was just reading today about the Scottsboro boys and the Jewish lawyer who represented them,
Yeah.
whose last name was Leibowitz. And he
Right.
had to have guards because of the death threats and so on.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't work in reverse.
It doesn't, no, it doesn't kind of transpose that way.
Mm-mm.
Um, and it is very disturbing because what I've encountered in some curriculum, and it is that kind of after a certain point in the discussion, Jews are completely out of the picture. Um, but but even when they are in the picture, Jews are not given the benefit of an identity. Nobody discusses Jews in terms of a people who are indigenous to the Middle East, who established a civilization. There's no, they literally could be anyone. So this could be happening to anyone. So it's really an erasure of the Jewish people. I consider it like a just a second erasure of them. It's using the Holocaust to erase the Jews further, and I take great issue with this, and I don't think that Holocaust education can be effective without understanding the people who were impacted and recognizing Jews and acknowledging them as people.
Right. And what's interesting is you often see people within Holocaust education frameworks talking about, and also Jehovah's Witnesses and Roma people and homosexuals, whatever. And they're correct. They
Yeah,
certainly are correct. But I notice more recognition of a Roma identity, that
yeah,
there is such a thing as Roma people, no
yeah,
matter where they are on the
yeah,
planet. But Jews are, well, that's a religion. They just worship a different way in their religion. But to your point, it's not given that same cultural um uh, continuity, um or they're described as, Jews are described as Polish. It's like it's just that
right.
these Polish people who weren't Catholic is
I
kind
mean,
of
we're
like the
like
impression you get.
regardless, it's just super vague. And I
Really
feel
vague,
like
yeah.
in many ways it's very intentional. It's this further way of either a kind of forced assimilation or erasure
Mhm.
of Jewish peoplehood. And so in many ways it not only doesn't serve to educate,
Right,
but it also serves a more nefarious purpose.
right,
And I mean, we see right now kind of where that has led us
right,
in terms of this this erasure of Jewish identity and this refusal to allow us to acknowledge our peoplehood and be in charge of our history from beginning to end. And uh, yeah, and kind of narrow us to this one event, which
right.
has,
Or
so
you'll see a lot of focus on the, righteous people.
yeah,
And that's great, whether it's Schindler or it's, one of
yeah,
the Arenas. There were like two
yeah.
people named Arena. But
The whole savior thing is,
the savior complex. I
yeah.
mean, Dara Horn talks about, people love dead Jews.
Oh god. When that
And
okay, so I had been doing this for a few years when that book came out, and
yeah,
that book was like literally I could not have been more thrilled.
I
I was
love
like,
that
this
book.
is
Yeah,
a masterpiece. She is a genius. That she has absolutely clarified every issue of this in a nutshell.
yeah,
Um, I did a four slide post, but if you really want to know everything about this, definitely read that book. You can't
right,
not read it.
right. The book
Also,
is People Love Dead Jews by Dara Horn. It's
yes,
high
and if
I
you don't
highly
have
recommend.
time, but
Yeah.
if you don't have time, also her podcasts. You can be
Yes.
in the car, do the podcasts. The podcasts are great.
Right. She got a great voice actor for the reader for her audiobook,
Yeah.
because that's how I
Oh,
read it during my walks. I was going on my walks and, it alternately made me laugh, made me cry. It was like all the things, all the feelings, but it's just so well written. It made me want to go read all of her books, because of how well she explains things and tells stories. She did storyteller. So even though she's telling you true things about real life, they're so beautifully told
yeah.
that you learn a lot. I learned a lot, and I thought I knew. I'm not everything, but I thought I knew a whole lot. There were
You
things
know,
I learned I did not know about history, about our own history. So highly recommend it. But so the first item on your list is the de-Jewification and the basically co-opting of or elimination of Jewish identity from the
yeah.
curriculum,
Yeah.
such that the students, so now I'm gonna put my little teacher hat on and to translate for the parents, students in a Holocaust education program really don't know who these people are who
Yeah.
had the bad thing happen to them. Now, when we had a conversation, you said something that was sort of funny. You said it would be like saying, the such and such people. What was it that you said?
Oh, I don't even remember, but it was something that I did with somebody I was talking to where I just said um something happened to the Boolean people. Something happened to the Booleans and the Boolean and then they just looked at me and said, "But who are the Booleans?"
Right.
And I'm like, it's so interesting to me how often we have this conversation about this tragedy and what happened to the Jews, and nobody says, but who are the Jews?
Right. Exactly. And I think people assume they know.
Yes, well, that's yeah,
And
yeah,
and that's a whole other conversation. But
yeah,
but that's a really important point. A student in school, somewhere between middle school and end of high school, depending on when they're introducing the topic. I mean, for us, when I was growing up, we saw Night and Fog in 7th grade. It was a little, we had to have a permission slip sent home. This is in the 70s. Is it okay if your child watches this disturbing movie? And I already knew about it. Obviously, growing up Jewish, I knew about the Holocaust. But, for all of us kids to watch this movie and then have conversations about it and so on. But I found even in a school where a decent percentage of the kids were Jewish. So, it was in New Jersey, and I would say we probably had in any given class of, let's say, 25 kids, you might have 3 or 4 who are Jewish. So, it's a decent percentage as things go. And yet nobody had no idea. It was like these people had bad things happen to them, but they wouldn't have known to differentiate them from French people, Polish people. It was more like Nazis came in and there were these people who lived in that country that they didn't like and they took them to these camps. They didn't know anything at
there's like
beginning
no
or end.
clarification,
None,
and
zero.
I mean, it does a couple of things. First of all, it kind of paves the way for dehumanization,
Mhm,
because there's
mhm,
no kind of personalization or awareness that and the second thing is that because there's no personalization, it I think it makes it difficult for people to understand or easier for them to excuse
right,
or rationalize or as horrific as that sounds, I
mhm,
mean, it's not uncommon to see that.
right. Or that won't or just because a lot of people, especially in America, don't know any Jews personally.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's if you don't live in certain sections of the country, you may or may not. You might know a Jewish person or a
Yeah.
family, but you may not know what that even means, or you might know what it means to that family, but you don't know anything about the history of the Jewish people.
Yeah, not only that, I
Yeah,
mean, coming from a family that's Israeli, even if you know a lot of Jews in the West, you have very little concept about
right.
what the realities are for Jews who don't live in the West,
Correct.
which has also led us to this unique place
Right.
with a lot of misinformation about
Right.
how things work for Jews who don't live in the West.
Now, what would you say to somebody watching who asked, or who said, look, let's give educators, schools, et cetera, the benefit of the doubt that they focus on the Holocaust in this more general way because while Jews were, impacted the most, they weren't the only ones sent to the
Yeah.
camps and, whatever. And we want to make sure that our students simply learn that genocide is bad.
Okay.
I'm
Then
doing the thing that, we often hear of, why do
totally.
you need to own this when the point of it is for never again, and it wouldn't necessarily happen to you. It could happen to somebody else. And we
Okay.
just need to
I'm
make sure it doesn't
totally
happen
going to address that, but a
again.
little later
Okay.
because it deserves addressing. And I think the answer might be I don't know how people would feel about the answer. But
Okay. Well, I don't want to get ahead of us. So we've kind of done number one
yeah,
is
let's go to
de-Jewification. All right. So number two is what?
mythologizing. So mythologizing.
Okay.
So 1 in 5 Gen Z kids think that the Holocaust is a myth. Okay, that's a statistic. I think it's from Pew. They think it's a myth. Why would they think it's a myth? Okay. So so here's my theory. And again, it's a theory. It's a lot of what I say or believe or share or conclusions I come to are the result of many years of um hearing facts and statistics and anecdotes and all kinds of uh reading curriculum, all these things.
Sure.
So here's an issue. It really boils down to this. And this is an issue I started addressing actually light from the get go. Um, for some reason, and I think it's because, and again, this is going to take us down the road to answer this question, but um, because there's not a lot of time or space allotted to Holocaust education, and this is not a commentary on that, it's merely a statement. And I think because there are so many maybe interesting books on it, and books are a great way to educate that age group and get people feeling connected with time in history. It's less dry, and for something this tragic, it's certainly an opportunity to feel a more in depth
Sure.
connection with
Sure.
a time in history
Mm-hmm.
for a middle school kid or even a high school kid.
Sure.
So they've kind of moved Holocaust education into the ELA classroom, into the English literature classroom
Mm-hmm.
with with the study of a book. So frequently, with the exception of Night by Elie Wiesel, frequently they will use either they won't use a primary source book, they will use a fiction book, they will use a fiction book that is not even really about a Holocaust victim. Sometimes it will, in the case of the boy in striped pajamas, it will be about a German kid.
Right.
And that's how they will try to encourage empathy for the son of the Nazi soldier. Um,
Or the
s-
book thief or something. Right.
right,
Right.
exactly. And so then you have this really disturbing, confusing situation for young people where they might very well be quite connected with this book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of these books are beautifully written and they encourage a lot of emotion, but by taking them out of the history classroom, most of their lesson plans either exclude history or it's really brushed over and minimal at best.
Right.
So, in a weird way, the mythologizing thing is almost like dejudification, in that it's like dehistorization or something, kind of like the removal of historical fact and context from the event.
Right. And
Um,
that's going to be a bigger problem, in my opinion, for students who also have not this is where your earlier point of how education is failing. They do such a poor job of
yes.
teaching history in
Oh my
general
God.
across the board, especially
Yeah.
of the Western world, that we have students that don't just think the Holocaust is a myth, they don't really couldn't place it on a timeline.
Oh
They know
no.
almost nothing about that. Well, forget almost. They know nothing about World War One. So then World War II doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if
No.
without understanding World War One, you don't really understand the rise of Hitler. You don't really understand what was going on in Germany. You can't begin to understand how this could happen. And then I think it gets easily mythologized as
Yeah.
maybe it didn't really happen. It's been grossly exaggerated,
Yeah.
because if you jump straight to the horrors
Exactly.
without the slow drip, drip, drip buildup from World War One to World War II and everything that happened in between, the crash and the reparations and all the things, it just seems incomprehensible.
Yeah.
How could this happen? They're picturing their life now. And then one day these people just put people in cattle cars and took them to the state. It just doesn't seem like it could
Okay,
happen.
so Deb, you already took us to the next place.
Sorry.
No, that's awesome, because it really, but you did. You took us to which is decontextualization. And I know we all hate that word context now, but I'm using it.
No, we don't.
I'm
I don't
taking it
hate the
back.
word context. I'm the one who was constantly haranguing people on the internet about how they drop context. They'll just pull something out like, this is such and such. I'm like, drop context much? Like, context matters. You don't get to drop it. Things don't happen in a vacuum. And what's hilarious to me is the same people who want to tell you all about my lived experience.
Yeah,
Their context matters
yeah,
desperately to
yeah.
every last little thing, including reality that isn't. But actual reality and context that happened to millions of people, no, we don't need to know about that.
And, to be fair, much of that context is still living history, at least for the
Yes.
time being. And so it's quite accessible in
Yeah.
terms of getting an idea of where, for me, I feel like, you know, not sharing the context of the history of Jews, of anti-Semitism, like you said, the millennia old. It's very difficult when people say, well, I don't understand. How could it go from this to this? Well, we do understand, but it must be taught. It must be explained.
Well, it didn't just go from this to this.
Exactly.
There's, people
We
get their
understand
ideas.
exactly what happened over millennia, and we can teach you that,
That's
but
right.
you have to be willing to learn. But also world history, political upheaval, Jews as a people in civilization, where civilization was during certain times. I realize that now it's the trend to kind of look back on certain periods of time and make judgments completely out of context, instead of having an understanding of that period and where we were societally, historically. Eh, there's no sense of any of that. Forget about for the Jews, there's no sense of that for anyone. Uh, and and like you said, people are not people are not being educated. I mean, right
Mhm.
now, European history is considered, passe. And
I don't even understand how people could fully understand the rise of the Third Reich without understanding ancient Rome. I mean,
well, yeah,
there's so much, and somebody in my comments
yep,
over on X is saying, pretty much the same thing, says, more than World War one needs to understand the Napoleonic Wars impact on Germany
Oh,
and the
yeah.
period of early industrialization. And that's absolutely true. You can't, we are teaching these things to our children, not just out of context within Europe at that time, or
Yes.
even in a 50-year time span. They do not even
Historically.
understand, they don't understand the nature of man. They
No.
don't understand,
Okay,
like,
well, now you're talking about Enlightenment education, which is also super important in
right.
the whole context, which is what I was saying about how what they do is they take things, out of context and judge it without having an understanding of the evolution kind of historically. eh, eh, But conversely, okay, now I'm taking us to the next slide, but I'm not going to take us to the next slide yet.
Okay.
Um, because I feel like you have so much more to say on this. And
No, I mean, decontextualization is what it is. I mean, it's what it sounds like, and we could probably do an entire show on the importance of context and understanding the Holocaust. But I hope for tonight it suffices to say, and I hope it's obvious to the audience, that you cannot teach this period of history in isolation as a unit. You just can't. You have to teach it to students who already are pretty well steeped in their understanding of Western Civ, at least Western Civ. I mean, at
yeah,
least that. And you have to have a better understanding, to your point, of the history of the Jewish people. You
yeah,
have to have a better understanding of the, like, how did the diaspora come to be, in the first place? Why were Jews in these places to begin with? Because that was a big problem that Hitler had, and and so on and so forth. And then when you better understand all of these influences and the events on a timeline, um it becomes less of a myth, much more comprehensible. And it also, the students really begin to understand how different it was, how unique it was, the industrialization of slaughter. Okay. So, yes, there have been many people throughout the ages who've been wantonly slaughtered, hundreds of thousands at a time by invaders and different people. But people sat down in Wannsee in a conference room and discussed what would be the most efficient way to remove an entire people from the planet.
yeah,
That was new. That was
yeah,
a little bit new.
yeah.
Yeah. Our kids don't learn that.
No, it's you're leading us down the path, and I'm gonna go here now because this is where it takes us, and
Yeah.
this is the big picture, which is the Trojan horsing of Holocaust
Okay.
education,
All right.
and essentially utilizing it to teach elements of an ideological curriculum, whether to assert a narrative or align it with ideology or using it to explore SEL topics. So it's essentially taking it all the way off of its course because it doesn't have any context. So it's easy to do. And most of what our kids are learning now, it's funny, we're talking about, you know, imperialism and how important it is to learn about that. Kids will say the word imperialist all day long
Right.
because they're taught that word, but they're
Right.
not taught it in context.
Right.
They're taught it as it's utilized when our education, because this is the big picture, when our education has been Trojan horsed to be used as a kind of, to facilitate ideology as opposed to educate on facts, on history, on the Enlightenment, on societal change, on, the fact that people can rant on and on about social justice and yet um, could not tell you anything about Martin Luther King because he's not allowed to be taught in a lot of civil rights curriculum anymore. It is deeply disturbing.
Right. Or they cherry pick the socialist things he said.
Thank you. Yeah.
So yeah, and they neglect all the they all the same. They neglect all the nice things he said about Jews.
Yeah, funny that,
Isn't that interesting?
isn't it?
Yeah, that the Trojan horsing is something that I have seen. I've spent a lot of time since October 7th talking about how uh, Holocaust education has been used not just this year or last year or even since 2016. A lot of people believe this all started with like Trump's election or something or COVID. And I'm like, no, guys,
Oh,
this
wow.
this goes way,
No. Oh my
way
gosh.
way back to the
Yes.
point where, I mean, my goodness, what is that history in ourselves, or what is that curriculum
Oh,
over?
facing history.
Facing history in ourselves
Yeah.
has been around for like 50 years, and for
Yeah.
at least the last 20 of
Yeah.
those 50 years, they have been Trojan horsing Holocaust curriculum, and if you go to their website, I've showed this on my channel many times, you go there and you don't recognize Holocaust education
No.
as Holocaust education. It's like very quickly segues into critical theory
Do
and
you do you
stuff
kn
of.
do
Go
you have
ahead.
any idea how many pictures I get from teachers and parents who have been to a Holocaust museum, and they're like, "What is this?
That's right.
Is there anything about the Holocaust here?"
Right.
And
Right.
in fact, there was a museum, I wanna say Portland, forgive me if I'm wrong. I know it was in the Northwest, um, where a bunch of their employees, uh, decided not to show up to work because there was going to be something about Israel in the
Yes. Mhm.
w
Yep, that's a fact, yeah, there was an
I
art
mean,
it was an art exhibit.
yeah,
It was an art museum,
yeah. Eh,
and yeah,
eh,
yeah,
there's there's a lot going on in our Holocaust education that just doesn't have anything to do with the Holocaust. So
right,
how are so they're not necessarily learning from it. And I mean it really just leads us right into this right back where we started, which is education doesn't work. So how can all Holocaust education work?
that's right,
A-
that's right.
and you know,
It just becomes a vehicle for the other things, to your point, English is now a vehicle for SEL,
right.
for social justice lessons, every subject, parents, that you think your children are learning
Yeah.
is not the subject they're learning. The
No.
subject they're learning is critical theory and social justice, and how they, the student, are responsible to bring it about, whatever it is. Okay.
Right.
So there's always injustice everywhere all the time. There are oppressors and oppressed. They have to find themselves in one of these two groups, and then they have to set about doing the work to fix the planet. And they can do it in a variety of different ways, of course. But there is no foundation, there are no concepts that they are learning other than the world is completely broken and you, child, have to fix it. They don't explain even where the brokenness came from, except they cherry pick, like slavery, right? And to the extent that they cherry pick and use the Holocaust as one of the cherries, it's similar to slavery in that, see, people are so mean to people. People are so oppressive to people, which is, I mean, it's certainly an example of that. But that's like the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg about what it
I
was
think,
about.
the root of it really that makes me so angry and sad and scared because, um, kids are everything.
Right.
There there will be no Jewish people without kids. And forget about our Jewish kids, all of these kids who are being used in this way, who aren't any child who is being kind of treated in this way by our school systems is not, I was going to say that basically when you educate a child and you provide them information and you teach them about the world and you give them facts and help them understand the context in which things work, that's
Right.
extremely empowering. That,
Yes.
that's what education is supposed to do. It's supposed to empower young people, children, and give them ways to understand how they can grow and learn more and contribute more and make sense of the world.
Well, it's supposed to empower them to think. So
Yes.
whether it's about this specific topic or to recognize relationships,
Yes.
that's called integration.
Yes.
So if you teach something in context and the student comes out of it having integrated not just the discrete pieces of knowledge but the concepts that flow from that,
Right.
then they have a prayer that's now a tool I can
Yes.
use when I encounter new
Yeah.
information, when something else is happening, or I learn about another period of history. I can compare, I can contrast, I can find trends, I can see themes, I can begin to understand cause, effect, and my ability to, obviously, we can never truly predict the future, but my ability to recognize that, if I
And
have
perceive
choice A
things.
and choice B, and
Yes.
there are no solutions, just trade-offs, right?
Right.
But that trade-off, the solution A has been tried,
Yeah.
10, 12, however many times throughout history. And you know what? There's a lot of evidence that that one doesn't really work because it has a tendency to, right? Whereas this other option has a tendency to do something better. So I now know which of these things. We're not empowering our students to actively think
No. And even
about
worse,
that.
this is my concern. Even worse, we're using these opportunities for education and these unique opportunities to really inform and support students in learning and using them to break children. I mean,
Well, yes. Mhm.
these children Kids are kids don't show up at college all ready for college. They show up broken.
Yes.
Broken by a system that says, "You have no power, plus here's the burden of the world on your shoulders. I'm going to I'm going to foist my narcissistic adult needs on you." This is what the system says to them. And you, as a child, are responsible for fixing it.
Right.
That is abuse. That's
It
not
is.
education.
Well, yeah, no child is responsible to fix adult problems,
No.
whether that is in uh whether that's in relationship situations. We
Right.
see this a lot with emotionally immature parents,
Yeah.
where they will lay their adult problems on their kids
Yeah.
about, whatever, their marriage or different things, even their parenting problems, right? That is widely accepted as abuse.
Yeah.
Just doing that in your own home.
Yeah.
Or even to a certain extent, we all kind of whine about money a little bit, right? We all go, oh, we can't afford that. We got to tighten our belts, whatever. People have done that for ages. But there's a difference between that and saying, like, you need to be so grateful because I was slave away and blah, blah, whatever. That kind of thing of, we are in a world of hurt and you need to do that XYZ.
Yeah.
No, this is an adult problem. And you can't lay that on so thick onto children. That is widely understood to be abusive. So
And
can you imagine
using
they go into school and they're told, the earth is gonna die. And maybe you got 12 more years. Oh, and PS, human beings are just awful. And you will be too if you're not careful. So you got to
or
do
you
these
are
things.
too
Yeah,
because of
you
how
are
you were
already.
born.
Yes, if you're white and you're
Because
male, you already
because
are.
you are an oppressor.
That's right.
Because you are Jewish.
Yeah.
And so really, I mean, this idea of like kind of original sin is being perpetuated by this whole kind of DEI crowd,
Right.
which is kind of ironic considering that progressives don't particularly like, neither do I. That I'm not a fan of that idea.
Mhm.
And the fact that, there's this idea that students are being taught at school that, you know, they are they have an original sin that they are born with
Right.
because they are in this place on the oppression wheel,
Right.
and that here is what the world is like and here is what must be done, and we are tasking you with doing it before they even know what the world is.
Well, that's another thing that you might add to your slides. I don't know what you would call it. You're so good with coming up with new terms. But and it kind of goes with the Trojan horsing piece, it's an extension of that.
Yeah,
When teaching Holocaust education, very frequently, and especially now,
yeah,
especially since October 7th, that becomes a means of laying extra responsibility onto Jewish kids,
yeah.
that
Oh,
they have an extra responsibility.
yeah,
They and not just they in America, but in Israel and like any
yeah.
place on the planet that a Jewish person happens to be, that you have to behave better. That because you experience this, you now carry this legacy of obligation to be more Christian than Christians. Turn the other cheek until you're bloody. It's like we did like feed your enemies as they're killing you. Give them cancer surgeries
We're
as they're
not we're
threatening
not
to wipe
only
you off the
that.
face of the earth. This is what's expected now, and the excuse given is you should know better because you went through the Holocaust, and how dare you now behave as badly, which is a disgusting, grotesque false equivalence.
Yeah.
But this extra responsibility put on Jewish kids that, like, well, especially because I never hear someone say that to a black child.
But
Well,
even in
especially
but
because your
Deb,
ancestors went through slavery, you should know better than to do fill in the blanks.
but
Never,
Deb,
ever.
even in practical terms, even in the classroom, when the teacher kind of points at the one Jew in the classroom and is like, "Explain this," or "You need to help us understand it."
Yeah,
Now, I can tell you that for any child going through anti-racism training, the onus and the burden is put on the student, which I do not agree with, but I think it's very interesting how the transverse is true when it comes to Jewish students in the Jewish situation, where Jewish students are told, well, you need to explain this to us because this isn't anti-Semitism, and what we're doing is fine. That, like you said, that is not something that would be said to a child of any other
no,
ethnic background or race or origin or so.
no.
um
If a Jewish student says this thing you just said or this approach you just took is anti-Semitic, it's it's you have to justify that to the nth
yeah.
degree. You have to explain in detail with, all kinds of resources and footnotes. And
And it doesn't
I'm
matter anyway, because
no,
all of the curriculum at their disposal essentially erases anything that we know to be true.
that's right. Well, when you're starting from a lie, right? And that's all you have to do. It doesn't matter what happened in the Holocaust,
Yeah.
because if you, to your point, out of context,
Yeah.
and then you lead with, if you don't teach the history of the Jewish people, so you don't know about the people, who are the people
Yeah.
who experienced the genocide. It's just like you
Yeah.
said, it could be any people. This group of people who I know nothing about. I don't know their history. I don't know where they come from. I don't know, why they're different. I
I
just
think
know they're different from me, but I don't know why or how or what that even means. Like you said, it's to them, it's just another kind of religion.
yeah.
They don't
And I
get it.
think sadly, to our detriment, one of the reasons that Jews have been such victims of this horrific propaganda is because that history has been erased.
Yeah.
So it's quite easy for somebody to rewrite it and speak
Right.
over it,
Right.
and, you know, and this is so I wanna say something that I kind of wanted to that I referred back to at the beginning in my circular, weird, round way of talking. I'm so grateful for your linearness, Deb. Um,
It's
um,
yeah, I get that a lot.
I
The
really am.
linear thinker.
It's
I should have been
especially
better at math.
appreciated.
Why was I so terrible at math?
You have amazing logic. That doesn't mean you're good at math necessarily. That's a
Yeah, no,
numbers
it
thing.
doesn't because I suck at math.
But
Anyway,
but um essentially saying it's not bad to teach Holocaust education as part of a curriculum um, around world history
right,
or around Jews as a people or around a study of the Middle East. Um, you know, uh, Dr. Nyalek said the other night on our webinar, she said, I actually don't want to teach Holocaust education. I
right,
don't want to teach the history of anti-Semitism. And she didn't say that because she doesn't want to teach it. She just has an understanding that if we were doing a better job of education in terms of start to finish and um, close reading and critical thinking and historical context, that these kind of um, these kind of little pocket size, stories would be less relevant
right. It
because
shouldn't
they
be
would
its
have
own
more
unit.
meaning.
It shouldn't be its own unit,
Thank
right?
you.
It should be part of it should be part of your study of the
Yes.
history of the Western world, Western Europe
Yeah.
in particular. But I mean, it was a world war, so but
Yeah.
it should be just so fully integrated into the study of that because
Precisely.
it touched Jews not just in Poland and France, right, and Italy, but in North Africa. People, that's what you
Look,
to your point.
most people have no idea that the Grand
Mhm.
Mufti of Palestine was like in tight with
Yeah,
Hitler, or that they actually got the yellow star from the
yep,
Arabs, or anything about Dimitude, or the fact that, yeah, like you said, I mean, there were people from North Africa who were sent to camps. There's all kinds of information that if there were any study
right.
of the Middle East as a whole, or Europe as a whole, or
That's
world
right.
history, that it would be, our kids would be bulletproof to
Yeah,
propaganda.
it would be so different that you wouldn't need to teach a unit. The only thing I'll say is that I was very fortunate in that I went from public school to private school after ninth grade. And so I had actually a really good European history teacher. So that by the time I was, I believe, a junior, I was able to take an elective class called Era of Hitler. So in
Wow.
other words, I had studied the whole, history of
So you
Europe.
could do a deep dive class.
And
But
that
a deep
class
dive,
was a deep
yeah,
dive,
a
and
deep
yeah,
dive class is different than like a 2-hour survey of something completely
right.
out of context.
When they do Holocaust education these days in school, if you're lucky, it's a
Yeah.
week. It's
Yeah.
a week.
Tops.
They may, to your point, in English, they might read, Number of the Stars,
Yep.
The Book Thief. Maybe they read Anne Frank. Do you know how many students have read Anne Frank and they don't understand that she died at a concentration camp?
Yeah.
I actually saw somebody say, "Well, she died of typhus." And I'm like,
Because they're taught it out of context.
"Yeah,
And
yes,
they
she
refuse to
did, but
even,
why did this otherwise perfectly healthy little 13-year-old girl, die of typhus? Because
yeah.
she's in a concentration camp." I
I
mean,
mean,
but these are the same people who say they baked him a birthday cake and while he was in the tunnels.
oh god.
I mean, what is your problem? Right? So it's the same mindset. And when it's out of context,
Yeah.
when you don't have any understanding of the history of these people to realize that 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 Jews are a people, It's
Yes.
not just an adjective.
Yeah.
And that, yes, it's important for you to learn that this can happen to anyone. It could happen to you. It could happen, but that's not the core message. The core message is that, scapegoating happens to tiny minority groups because they are tiny minority groups.
Mhm.
Right? And they don't get that message. In fact, you pointed out how some students think it's a myth, it never happened. There's a sizable percentage of students who believe genuinely that Jews brought it on themselves.
Oh, yeah. Oh, 1,000%. And also because they don't understand the identity piece and the
That's
peoplehood.
right.
Literally, I can't tell you how many millions of times I've heard this. My kid was in class and somebody said, "You can just change your religion and then you won't be Jewish." And this could have all been avoided. And when more classes than not end up on that note, kids are actually walking out of the class with a worse idea of the
That's right.
impact of the Holocaust, of who Jews are, and ultimately, honestly, I feel like done poorly, it leads to more problems than it does good. And uh,
Absolutely.
I
There
just
there are
I
students who, if the teacher says, "Well, Hitler blamed the Jews for World War One. Hitler blamed the Jews for the Versailles Treaty. Hitler blamed the Jews for not getting into art school. Hitler blamed the Jew," right? So you could come away from that, as many do. Wow, these Jews have really suck.
they're trouble,
Like, they
right?
did all that. They caused World War One.
Yeah,
We live in a world now where all you have to say is so and so blames so and so, and it's immediately like, well, that must be true.
yeah,
Or why would they blame them? Right? Because
yeah.
remember, we're not teaching the concept of rights properly. People don't understand that just because you're
No.
accused of something doesn't make you guilty. There's this where there's smoke, there's fire perception.
Well, Deb,
Um,
I wanna interject and say, just you bring up a really important point
yep.
about the teachers, which was a main tenet of our petition this year, which is, listen, the teachers are deeply indoctrinated,
Yes.
and they also are not given the proper training in terms of almost any curriculum that touches on Jews or let alone the Holocaust. So it's forget about history on a whole. I'm talking specifically to this point. Um, so the fact that even if we are to, somehow gloriously give a perfect curriculum to somebody that achieves every point and every aspect,
Right.
you cannot take the teachers out of the equation.
That's right. You can't. And how they say things and how they position
Mhm,
the causes and so forth makes all the difference. It really,
mhm.
really does. So yeah, it's a big problem. Now, I do think in a minute they're going to cut us off. I'm not going to do anything to end it, but if they kick us off of Instagram, please come join us at The Reason We Learn on YouTube, or um, over on X. It would be at Deb_Filman. And we're going to keep going here, but I just wanted to let you know, I just don't want to have to start another live because I'd have to exit this studio and it won't work very well. So thanks to everyone on Instagram who joined us on Instagram, and as I said, please come join us over on the other channels. And if you're not already a subscriber, please do consider subscribing over there. I would really appreciate it. It helps the algorithm quite a bit. All right, so back to the teachers are indoctrinated. You're aware, I'm sure you're aware that the, facing history in ourselves is like a big part of that, right?
I have so many thoughts on this. I
Their professional development is like legendary for how bad it is about Jews. So,
it's really I I'm gonna say this. I have searched high and low for anything being used or teacher trained or that doesn't have this bias or kind of limited perspective,
Yeah.
or um I
I think you
I don't
have
I
to
don't wanna
read.
sound like a Debbie Downer,
No, you can't use curriculum. I
Yeah.
think that's the key. So
Yeah.
somebody asked also in our comments, and this is one of my members of my community, Crystal, says, we will be studying modern world history. She's homeschooling next year.
Oh,
What are your recommendations for books, materials for a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old for
oh
the
my gosh.
Holocaust?
Okay.
So love to hear
What
if
are
you have
yours?
suggestions. So mine um are probably going to be, reading some books for sure, but the best books are a little over their head. I mean, or they're a little disturbing. So I don't know, it depends on the child, what they're ready for. But I think uh, it's probably more important to prime them for the ideas that will
Mm,
help them learn the Holocaust
yeah.
issues later, and make sure that they're learning the history, like the history of Europe at that level, because you can't learn it too many times, right? I mean, so at 10 and 13, make sure they're really learning the history of Europe deeply, and then you're going to repeat it again, and so forth and so on. But I think, even reading something like Animal Farm, believe it or not, while it is covering sort of Stalinist sort of socialism or Lenin and this and that, it still does a pretty good
That's a
job
brilliant
of
suggestion.
helping children understand the way that propaganda
Yeah.
works, the way that social controls work, using animals.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think introducing them to the core ideas of how people can be manipulated
Mhm.
using something that is relatable, which is animals, is
Yeah.
probably a good place to start. And then I think from there, I would 13, you could probably do Anne Frank if you have a mature 13-year-old. But the issues to talk about there are more aligned with, you know, what would, with the neighbors versus the Franks, the other people who are on the outside. What do you asking questions? What do you think goes through their minds? What were they afraid of, do you think? Why would they do this? And so on. So just see what your child thinks rather than telling them stuff. I'd be more like, why do you think someone would do that? How much fear do you have to have? What do you have to believe about somebody to think they deserve to be taken away by force and maybe killed? Like,
Yeah.
how bad do you have to be afraid of someone? And then in this day and age, I'm not gonna lie, I would, if I were homeschooling, I'd harken back to a certain point in time starting in 2020 in the United States in particular, where people were straight up saying they thought their neighbors should go to jail if they didn't do things a certain way and comply with certain things that really were pretty symbolic more than anything. And what is that? What is that? What does fear make people do? So I'd be having more general conversations about about propaganda, about fear. I might be looking for books like that. I don't have anything off the top of my head that does a great job on its own of teaching the Holocaust. When I was in high school, I was able to read primary sources. I
Yeah.
was even able to read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, right? I was able to
Wow.
read books that delve into it. Like you said, like
Yeah.
a deep dive,
Yeah.
and that's where you really learn it. It's kind of surface before that, and it can be like scary in a way that, like you said, causes the cognitive dissonance causes them to just shut down and or mythologize or make it like, no, this never happened, or
Yeah.
this won't happen to me, or this will happen because it was their fault. So I think timing is key. It's much more important, as you've just pointed out. It is so much more important to make sure that your children learn European history, the history of the Depression. Very important. They need to understand it on a global scale, not just the United States.
Yeah.
And the more deeply they understand these historical events, when you do want to introduce them to much tougher material, let's say in high
Mhm.
school, as you said, they're bulletproof, they're ready. They're
Yeah.
emotionally ready. They are conceptually ready. They understand the history behind it. I'm not even 100% sure I would introduce it at that young age, honestly.
I could not agree with you more. But I think it's just what we were talking about. I think it's like the perfect time to be laying that groundwork
Yeah,
for teaching kids how to think and how to process things and how to like connect ideas and
right.
see patterns and learn about human nature or learn there's so many, this is a great this is a great way to reference this again. Holocaust education in quotes is only as good as our education system.
It
So
really
it's not really relevant, and I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but what I'm saying is that is I'm just kind of agreeing with what Deb just said about I just think those years are important years to determine if your child is getting kind of the right education about the world, about facts, about and understanding what they can learn about the world and feel sort of empowered by that control of that knowledge.
right.
And so by the time they're in high school, you're really not teaching them. They're teaching themselves. You're providing sources and they are making those connections and they
Mhm.
don't need somebody to teach them chants or,
That's true.
you know, go
That's
stand
true.
in the street and use a bunch of
Right.
lingo that is
I
inappropriate at
I think
people.
there are parents right now, I think there are parents who want it taught
Yeah.
because they genuinely believe it's an antidote. They're wrong. It's at best case, it might make a few students more like, "Oh, that's really bad," right? But I mean, worst case, and I see this happen way too much, it backfires spectacularly and
I mean,
actually
watching kids
yeah,
read Mouse and, like, having we got so many emails about teachers adding, like, "How do you draw a swastika like the cover of Mouse?" Or, "In what ways, in what ways are Jews unhappy people with bad family relationships?" Like,
yeah,
just horrible, it
right,
couldn't be worse. And
right,
listen, this is not to say I think middle school would be a great opportunity to teach kids about, the Middle East
right.
and Jewish civilization, millennia of Jewish civilization.
But good luck. If you're not allowed to put up a map if you're
Well, yeah.
not allowed to put up a map
No, I
that
know.
says Israel. If you're not, and I'm sorry, but you go back a certain distance, and that's what the map says still. It wasn't the UN recognized state of Israel, it was the kingdom of Israel. But, if you're not allowed to use historical maps that are accurate, if you're not allowed to discuss any of this without, hedging everything, and some people believe X, which I'm hearing from parents. Um, I don't know how you
Well, have
even
you heard about
begin
the
to do it.
meet have you heard about the meet in the moment approach to history? That we have to meet it in the moment
Wow,
with
that
our
sounds like a
feelings?
euphemism. That sounds like a euphemism for something super Orwellian.
It sure does.
Like history is what we say it is right now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We're meeting
Yeah.
it in the moment, and it's about
We've
coming up
always been at war with we've always been at war with Eurasia.
and
Or
literally this comes from a curriculum from
sorry,
Bridging
Oceania.
Cultures
Yeah.
where it says we need to teach them to how they feel first instead of how they
Well, that's affective learning. That's Dewey. That goes
yeah,
all the way back to the turn of the century. I mean,
yeah.
again, it's like the problem with covering education or any
There's
piece
you keep going every time yeah, it
any
goes
piece of education is you almost have to go back to the beginning because if
always.
you stay in the moment, you're missing the problem.
Yeah,
You're missing the forest for the trees.
yeah.
And the forest was planted by people who were not interested in the forest bearing fruit. They were interested in chopping it down and converting it into lumber.
Yeah. Yeah.
To, build other things according to their designs.
But
And
here's the
that is
thing,
very different.
as Jews, we have our own relationship with education.
Yes.
And that tradition is steeped in question and debate. And we have so much to contribute to education, and
Yeah.
instead we're being erased from it. I mean, it's no wonder that Jews don't fit in. Jews are literally the antithesis of the DEI story. Jews are about resilience. Jews are about bad stuff happens, but we grow from it and we learn and we move on and we build. It's not
Yeah.
about you are bad, the world is bad,
Right.
you must fix it, but good luck.
Well, I think that's one of the big problems with Holocaust education, and I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg. In other words, I
Yeah,
don't know whether Jewish families said, "You need to be teaching Holocaust schools," or
yeah.
whether schools started saying, "Hey, let's teach the Holocaust," and y uh, for their own reasons. I mean, I don't know, but I
I
do.
think it was approached I think the first approach was a way to kind of make people more sensitive to kind of what Jews had been through, and of course, the ultimate result was unfortunately quite the
Well, it's too
opposite.
big a contradiction. It's way
Yeah,
too big a contradiction. If you've got the entire curriculum since at least Paulo Freire, okay,
yeah.
and that goes
Oh
back
my
pretty
god,
far.
yeah,
And if you've got everything critical theory oriented, which, as you pointed out, divides us into oppressor oppressed
yeah,
classes, and you can tell if someone's oppressed by their outcomes.
yeah.
So if somebody's successful, clearly they're
Well,
not
no,
oppressed.
that's why the Jewish story
Right.
doesn't fit in, and it never
So if
has.
you teach the Holocaust and you don't end up with Jews still in ghettos, okay,
Yeah,
then it never really happened, because
and
if
that's
it
why it
really
doesn't work.
happened, yes, if it really happened, then you wouldn't have these great outcomes. So you're lying, you're exaggerating, you're doing it for some nefarious purposes. They're so, not only the teachers so indoctrinated, but the students have been so well trained from kindergarten all the way up, that in order, we have to be nice to the people who seem downtrodden, these sort of the underdog thing. Jews are the overdog. They're not the underdog. We're
Yeah,
the underdog in numbers,
and unfortunately, the
but that's it.
Holocaust is frequently kind of, treated as a it's weaponized
Yes.
to say that, "Oh, the Jews think because they suffered the Holocaust that they get Israel." And they make that connection over and over and over now.
Yep.
And it's really frustrating because, again, if they had any kind of historical education, if there was any context to their Holocaust education, it would be improbable for them to make that leap. There's no way that would even be okay in anybody's brain. But
Yeah.
because of how they teach it and because of the propaganda and the lack of historical fact about the history of Israel, the Balfour Declaration,
Right.
the anything, they have no concept of the Nishul or of the expulsion of all of,
Right.
the Jews who comprise most of Israel's population,
Right.
who were from now Arab lands, but Middle Eastern lands in North Africa, and so they then say this is the Holocaust, and they want you to know about it because they want an excuse for what they're doing now, and they utilize it as Holocaust inversion again and again and again in curriculum these days.
Yeah. I think I think that's a huge point that gets overlooked, that if you don't teach the history of the Middle East and
Yeah.
the history of the Arabs,
Hello? Arab
I mean,
imperialism?
as important, that's the other thing, is if we're going to teach a true story of slavery,
Oh,
If we're
I was
going to teach
literally just gonna go there.
if we were gonna teach a true history of slavery,
Yeah.
if we really cared about the
Mhm.
truth, then we
Mhm.
would have to go way beyond 1619,
Yep.
and we would have to go way beyond the colonies, the United States, where we were like with like a tiny little what, like 3% or some ridiculous amount of all the African slaves. But we would have to do a much better job of
Yeah.
teaching the entire, like I said, the entire concept of the enslavement of humans, right? How long
Yeah.
has this been going on? Since forever. You know, we literally have the word slave, okay? There are words that are even older than slave to describe people who were conquered people. They used to have a word for them that simply translated to conquered person, because conquering is what you did. I mean, that's just, but one tribe conquers another tribe. That's how the world worked. And I genuinely believe that we would have fewer problems and, across the board with young people if they had half a clue as to how unique and, dare I say, privileged their lives are
Yeah.
in the 21st century, and they were in the 20th century to a large degree, the latter half of it anyway, in terms of living as a people who, have no concept, no personal connection to conquest, no
But,
personal
Deb,
connection whatsoever.
that does not serve the purpose of the narrative of disempowerment
Well, of
and
course not. And
and the agenda of disempowerment, I mean.
we have to press that,
Yeah.
because in the United States in particular, but in the West in general, class warfare doesn't sell.
No.
It just doesn't really sell anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
really, I mean, World War II, it just doesn't really sell. It didn't sell all that well in World War II, which is why the Jews. So, people were either rich or poor. There was, and it because of World War I, but prior to that, they had recollections of not being poor. They had a recollection of a middle class, even under the czar, and even, I mean, not in Russia czar, but sorry, even under the emperor, you still had this bourgeois, layer of people. They
Yeah.
didn't really, it appealed to people in Russia because huge peasant class. Western Europe, not quite as much. Not quite as much. So how are you going to sell that? How
Yeah.
are you going to, the communists were making some headway, but the fascists were able to come in and do the whole, like, the fatherland and all the stuff, or, Italy and my country and whatever, because the class warfare wasn't really selling all that well. Not as a straight up class warfare thing. It was easier to sell my country versus the other countries. And now, because class warfare doesn't sell, nationalism sells to some people. Okay.
Yeah.
But what really sells in a country that has had 100 years of effective learning and toxic empathy, where the number one most important thing in the world is what other people think of you, and
Yeah.
whether other people like you and think you're a nice person, a nice and good person. And it's not whether you think you're a good person, do other people think you're a good person? That is the most important thing in the world. And you do that for
Virtual
100
sig
years,
yeah, virtue signaling.
it's it's super easy to sell. These people are being picked on and they're suffering. And you can be a good person so easily. Just say nice
And you
things
don't
that
have to know anything.
you
You
don't have
have
to know
to know
anything.
absolutely nothing.
Outsource your morality. It's super simple. Put up a flag. Just like, all you have to do is wave the right flag, say the right things. We saw that with some of the student protesters. Why are you here? I don't, I wish I were more educated. I don't really know. I heard like some people were like being oppressed. And so I came.
They don't really know.
That's an
And
actual
if you
quote.
tried to they rant about apartheid, and then when you say, "But, when Israel left Gaza, they had to take every single Jew with them
Even the dead ones,
because yes,
they
because
dug up the graves.
they dug up the graves,
Yeah,
because that was the system that they wanted, an
that's
apartheid
right.
system, and that was not a system. That's not a system that's used in Israel, but that is a system that was. But they are not interested in the real definition of words, or the real historical moments, or
Yeah.
anything that's even happened within their lifetime. Like you said, it's more important, it's, I mean, I
They to get people to a place where they want to be led, where they want to be controlled, or
yeah.
I should say
It's
protected.
about ideological alignment
That's
and
right.
virtue signaling and moral kind of narcissism, really.
Right. But
And
it's all about ultimately about submission.
yeah,
And if, in order to get a population of people who have been historically steeped in individualism
yeah.
and
How much
grit,
fear does that take? How much fear does
a
that take?
lot of
A
fear.
lot, right? It
That's
takes a
right.
lot of fear.
And it's been tried before. For those of you who, I mean, like I said, I learn something every day. And, even at my advanced age, and even with my historical knowledge, I'm reading a book by Timothy Sandifer called Freedom's Furies. I highly recommend it. And it talks about the lives of Isabel Patterson, Rose Wilder Lane, and Ayn Rand. And it's set, within the time frame of, right now I'm in FDR time frame, Depression, New Deal, all this. And I could be listening to him talk about speeches given today. I could be listening to him talk
Yeah.
about policies that are being proposed today.
Well,
It's so eerie. The deja vu is uncanny and has nothing to do with Jews. Nothing whatsoever to do with Jews. Just
no.
history.
It's
Just
just history.
it's
We
just history,
always
but
say
it's the
this too.
same challenges, the same thing of people saying, ugh, bourgeois middle class life
Yeah.
is so yesterday and bad and terrible and urban. And we need to let the scientists run everything. We need to let the experts tell us how to live and run our economy and all the things. And they had to be pulled back from the brink of totalitarian rule. I mean, FDR was a dictator, but we were pulled back from the brink of what could have been another Mussolini-esque kind of a situation. People say, oh, it was the war that did it. A little bit. But no, it was people hearkening back largely in
Mhm.
art, largely in novels and writing and op-eds and plays and different things, going back to this sort of bourgeois values, if you will, and saying, I kind of wish people were nice to people again. And Rose Wilder Lane joins her mother and writes the Little House on the Prairie series. And honestly, if you want to inoculate your kids against just bad ideas and entitlement, make sure they've read that series if they're young. Make sure they've read it, because you got to connect them to our past. And what's good about our past, what made us like survive, was that kind of grit. So believe it or not, it's elements like that that pulled us back more than any policy, more than somebody new getting elected, and definitely more than going to war. Going to war didn't really solve the problem. It really didn't. A lot of the socialism, communism stuck around even after the war. So, and we're seeing that now. But what pulled us back culturally was culture, was actual culture. So there's a lot we can do with our children. We're just unfortunately going to probably have to do it at home. We're probably going to have to do it at home, because at school, they're not doing this. They're not reading Little House on the Prairie. Are you kidding me? They're reading like the 17 dystopian novels and like, The Hate You Give.
But
Books
you
like,
know what? It's what you said about it's what you said about people kind of desiring this big daddy thing with
yeah,
somebody to watch over them. You have to get past that, and a lot of people are, and they're saying, I want to parent my children.
yes.
I really want to parent my children. And as Jews, and I'm going to be specific to that because that's my purview. I think we have a lot to offer in terms of that. It's the nature of our tradition and our heritage to educate our kids at home, to follow our traditions at home. And I think we have a lot to contribute to our communities in terms of our story of resilience, and in
Mhm.
terms of, like, guess what? You can struggle and not be oppressed and not be the oppressor.
And I'm going to say something that might make people a little mad, but I'm going to say it. The people who need to never forget the Holocaust the most are the Jews. We can try to make everybody else know our story all day long. But if we don't know our story, then we're sunk.
Deb, I did a post. Never again wasn't the world's promise to us.
That's
It's
right.
a promise. It's our promise to ourselves.
100%. And what I've seen, I mean, I've seen both wonderful things since October 7th in that direction, but I've also been disappointed. I've seen people rise up and say, how come we're not in DEI? How come we're not in the intersectional chart? Right? And that is exactly the wrong thing to be doing. I've seen people scream and yell and rant and rave for legislation to force more Holocaust education into the schools. And all that's doing is turning people who are already anti-Semitic into like, see, they look at how they just force their way into our lives, whatever. And it just, I'm not saying don't do it because it makes people not like you. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's not an antidote. You don't get people to not be anti-Semitic by teaching them, just like SEL doesn't work. You don't make nice people by teaching them to be nice people. Okay. You teach them how to think. Thinking people, rational people, independent thinking people, active thinking people, rational people tend to not be nasty. It's a little bit of an inoculation against hating, because hate ultimately stems from irrationality. It's an irrational fear of the other. And it starts with the irrational part. Collectivism is irrational. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. It only makes sense to your lizard brain. It only makes sense to the part of you that's like, I'm scared, must find tribe. That's the only way it makes sense. In a world where you are not under immediate threat of death, it really doesn't make sense to like team up and us and them-ish and whatever. It only causes problems and disharmony and war. And so I think that you don't force that on people. We should be having conversations more about how do we teach our kids in a more direct instruction way, less affective emotion, get out of your navel and get into the books. Get into the books. Actually travel through time by reading, but of course they'd have to know how to read first. So yeah, the system is broken. And so talking about Holocaust education as a solution to the problem of Jew hatred is you just there, you were the spoon. The dam has burst and this is you with the spoon. Not gonna work. That's my take.
It's in a nutshell.
My hot take.
It is the take. It's,
Yeah.
Holocaust education doesn't work because education isn't working. So we can't kind of shoehorn it in.
Yep. So any last like suggestions about, I know Crystal is still asking, if you had any thoughts about books or ways to even teach the history. I mean, she's going to go back over the Bible again. That's a great way to get quite a bit of history, especially the Old Testament. But and Story of the World's a great spine. That's what she's using. Any other thoughts?
Honestly, I will say this, that we are trying to interject some of our own curriculum that's more fact and history based. So if you want to go to our website at JewsInSchool.org, you can see a great, like very simple lesson plan by Dr. Nyelect called The Story of the Jews. And it's all fact and historical based. And
I can vouch for that because I know Naya and I know her curriculum. Naya's the best. We love Naya. She's been here quite a few times. If you're new to the channel and you haven't seen the shows with Dr. Elect, definitely go check them out. She's a gem and one of the most knowledgeable people I know on this and all subjects related to Jewish history. But also European history, Russian history, Russian literature. Like she knows so much about so many things. And that's really what it comes down to. The more history you learn, the harder it is, in my opinion, to hate anyone.
Yeah.
Except the
100%.
people who know history and willfully ignore it. I hate them. Yeah, I'll admit it. Not a fan. The ones who
Me
know better,
neither.
and they just conveniently ignore it, or they hope you don't know it, or they take advantage of the fact that you don't know it because they've arranged for you to not know it
Yeah.
because they set up the
But
school.
but protect your kids from that
Yeah.
by, you know, feeding them that history with a dose of critical thinking.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, as I said at the outset, you guys have to follow at Jews in School on Instagram. Lots of wonderful content. You're going to keep up on not just what is actually going on in schools with relation to, anti-Semitism that's popping up in schools, whether your kids are Jewish or not. You ought to know because this is ugly, right? Anti-Semitism, first they come for the Jews, right? But
Yeah.
it's ugly, and it's creating an unsafe environment for all students. It's creating an environment where students can't really learn because they're so preoccupied with all of this fighting and protest and discord and stuff that doesn't really have anything to do with them. What is happening in the Middle East right now, unless you are Jewish, it really doesn't have anything to do with America's K-12 students. And it doesn't even really have anything to do with America's higher education students, again, unless they're Israeli or, literally from Gaza. But if they're not, this has nothing to do with them. This isn't their fight. This is nothing that they need to be concerning themselves with at the moment. Not to the level that they are. If they want to, privately go off and do something to help people, whatever. But it's too much. And you'll get updates on what's been going on so that if you are interested in that and would like to weigh in this election season when there are policies floated, just know that Jews in School and I agree that more Holocaust education is not the solution. That's
Better
our
education is the solution.
better overall education is the solution.
Less indoctrination, more facts.
It would be more important to get rid of DEI in education, or rather critical theories in education, critical pedagogy. It would be much more important if you have somebody saying, I'm going to go back to a knowledge-based curriculum that is, ideologically neutral, fact-based, teaches chronological
100%.
history, etc. That person, I would 10 times more interested in that person than somebody who says, I'm adding more Holocaust education, or we're going to sign on to the definition of the international definition of anti-Semitism or whatever with our school. These are gestures. These don't do anything. These don't mean anything. What our children are learning is going to be the antidote.
100%.
So, any other final thoughts for you?
No, I wish I could stay on here for another hour. Actually, I have like so much to talk about with you, but
We'll have to do another
um,
one.
we have to do another one. I have really enjoyed this more than you
Me
know.
too. Me too. Yeah,
Um,
it's always great to talk to somebody else who A, loves history, and B, gets it. Just gets that, it's the education that's broken stupid.
yeah,
It's not just this.
yeah. Oh, here, really quick.
Yeah.
There is on our website, go check out our website. It's
Yes.
jewsinschool.org, and you can actually find it through Instagram too. There's a little link in bio, but we actually have a way for you to like spot the red flags in your curriculum.
Mhm.
So go check that out. And if you want to kind of have a deeper dive into why what your kid is learning might not be so great and where the red flags are.
Yeah,
That's
that's
my
great.
last contribution.
Yeah, and I have and I'll just, plug also my own channel of the Reason We Learn on YouTube. I've
Yes.
done a lot of videos that delve into that curriculum, the red flags in the curriculum as well, how we teach hate, how it comes up. Some of it is specifically how we specifically teach hate about anti-Semitism, but also just hate in general. So there are videos going back 3 years that go into curriculum and go into the things, explain, why this is happening, as well as the words that, or rather the code words
Yeah.
that they're using that you think as a parent, well, that sounds nice, right? Inclusion, that's good, right? Right? Belonging, that's a good thing, right? Isn't belonging
Oh,
good? And
the
I made a
branding
video called
always sounds
Belonging
so
is
delightful.
what?
The branding always sounds so delightful
Doesn't it?
until you find out what
So
it
my
means.
video is called "Belonging is Bullshit."
Yeah, that was literally that is my favorite title of all of yours. Okay. I'm literally going to rant forever here. So I'm just going to say thank you so much, Deb. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
this.
Thank you for coming on, and thank you for being willing to, because I know what you do is hard and it's time
Well,
consuming
I
when you
don't do this normally, but I
I
was
know, you
excited
do
to talk to you.
yeah, you don't she does not do that. I'm very lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones. So, anyway, thanks everyone for watching, for listening. The replay will be up, immediately on YouTube. If you are watching on the replay, thank you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Really appreciate it. Have a great night, everybody.